Derek Martin walked into a police station in Brighton, south of London, and said 4 words that shook a community. "I've murdered 2 people." His victims? Prosecutors say none other than his stepdaughter, Chloe Bashford, and her husband, Josh. After a long delayed journey through the courts, Martin is finally on trial. But what reportedly drove him to commit such a violent act? Does he have a defense? We're going to break it all down with an international attorney. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. When Derek Martin walked into Brighton Police Station one evening back in June of 2023, police say he told them the unimaginable. 4 words that would change everything. "I've murdered 2 people." And those 2 people, they were his former stepdaughter, Chloe Bashford, and her husband, Josh. Now, if you haven't heard about this case, this one takes us overseas. It takes us to East Sussex, England, a tragedy that touches on family ties, hidden resentment, mental health struggles, a justice system that even now in 2025 still hasn't delivered closure. So today we're going to unpack how a quiet family dispute spiraled into absolute tragedy and how it left an entire community stuck waiting for closure. This takes us back to June 9th, 2023 on a Friday afternoon in New Haven, which is a coastal town near Brighton. Chloe Bashford was at home. She was a 30-year-old mother of 4. Her husband, Josh, was working that day. Friends, family described them as, quote, amazing parents, that they were funny, they were loving, the kind of couple who seemed to hold their world together effortlessly. But behind the scenes, there was tension. Now, to be clear, it wasn't between Chloe and Josh. It was between Chloe and someone she still called Dad, Derek Martin. According to the Times UK, Derek had once been married to Chloe's mother, Elaine. He'd helped raise Chloe from her early teens, and even after the divorce, she stayed in touch. They texted often, they saw each other. She reportedly treated him with the same affection she always had. But in the months before that June day, something changed. Martin was sinking, especially financially. He had taken to gambling, according to the Times. The debts apparently piled up. The BBC reports he was around $11,000 in debt. And 6 months before the killings, he reportedly stopped taking antidepressants. Per the Telegraph, he told police he felt used all the time, and it was as if he could never do enough for people. And so on June 9th, Martin had arrived sometime that morning at Chloe and Josh's home on Lewes Road in New Haven. This is according to authorities. But what happened by midday, prosecutors say unfolded in a matter of minutes. At around 12:15 p.m., prosecutors allege that Martin and Chloe spoke briefly in the kitchen, possibly about money, and police later confirmed that there were no defensive wounds, consistent with a long fight. But instead, this attack, according to them, began suddenly and violently. Investigators believe the initial weapon that Martin used was a hammer. Prosecutors in court this week said the first blow struck the top of Chloe's head. Moments later, Martin allegedly grabbed a large kitchen knife and stabbed Chloe 8 times. Prosecutors say that 2 of those wounds went in 20 centimeters deep. That is 7 inches. This killed her. At approximately 12:20 p.m., Chloe's husband, Josh, comes home, and prosecutors believe he was confronted almost immediately by Martin, who was still holding that knife. Josh reportedly ran upstairs into his bedroom, where he suffered multiple stab wounds and blunt force trauma to his face and neck. Prosecutors say Martin allegedly then strangled him, possibly using a belt that was found at the scene. And after the killings, the BBC reports that prosecutors say Martin started to move through the house methodically, changing his clothes, removing door handles from the bedrooms where police later found the couple's bodies, and detached the doorbell camera from the front of the house. He then apparently left the property. And where did he go? To pick up his grandchildren from school. That afternoon, investigators say he had collected Chloe and Josh's children from school, brought them to a Costa Coffee in Peacehaven and a McDonald's, and then drove them to their grandmother's home, right? His ex-wife, Elaine Sturgis, before leaving them safely in her care. Now, prosecutors say he also told the oldest child their parents had a big row, so a disagreement. Hey, I want to take a quick minute to thank Upside for sponsoring our coverage of Sean Diddy Combs' trial. Now, Upside is amazing. It is a free app that gets you cash back on daily essentials like gas, groceries. I pump my gas, I can use Upside. I go out to lunch, I can use Upside. Maybe I get something at a convenience store, I can use Upside. And why not get cash back when doing all these things, right? And yes, this is actual, real cash back. It's money that appears in your Upside app that you transfer right into your bank account. So once you have the free Upside app, you claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside. You pay as usual using a debit or credit card. You follow the steps on the app, you get paid. So to find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on screen, and make sure to use our promo code LC Sidebar. You'll get a special one-time offer of 35 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. That's promo code LC Sidebar for a one-time special offer of an extra 35 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. And then, a short while later, he would be accused of sending Elaine an absolutely bone-chilling message. And we will get to that part of the story in a minute. But first, to help me break all this down, I want to bring back onto Sidebar international law attorney David Tafuri. Thank you so much for taking the time. Good to see you again. Let's start here. In cases involving premeditation versus sudden acts of violence, right? How does UK law determine the severity of the charge? How do UK investigators handle a crime like this?
Well, it's not altogether different from how we do it here in the U.S. They're going to look at all the evidence that they're able to collect, and in this case, it's helpful that the defendant gave a confession the same day as he allegedly committed these murders, and he gave some explanation for why he committed the murders. And there's other evidence based on the people he spoke to right before the alleged crimes, and so they will kind of look at all of that. And of course, the most interesting part to me is his defense now of insanity.
Yeah, I want to get to that. But you talk about the evidence that they built in this case so far, the removal of security cameras, the phone disposal in the building. When you're talking about a case of premeditation or a case of obstruction of justice, that feels quite significant. I mean, your opinion about the evidence against him, putting aside the idea of, mental health, that I think would suggest a level of planning or a level of premeditation.
Yeah, certainly with respect to the cameras and some of the other things he did before the crimes, that would show premeditation. Disposing of his stepdaughter's phone, which I understand happened after the crime, would not show premeditation. And moreover, there was some evidence, at least I think one grandson said he had a really bad temper, which would suggest, that would be one of the explanations for why this happened that didn't involve premeditation. So I think it's going to be a bit of a tough case to make on the evidence, but it's certainly possible.
Let's explore this. What role, as far as you know, what role does mental health play in UK criminal cases for violent crimes? If he claims that he was temporarily out of his mind due to depression or not taking meds, does that affect guilt? Does that affect sentencing? What should we be thinking about?
The UK has what's called the McNaughton rule, which is from the mid 1800s, and they followed it ever since then, which is that if a person is suffering from a serious mental condition and that mental condition caused them to not know what they were doing or not know what they were doing was wrong, then they could be found to be guilty by reason of insanity. And in that case, the sentencing would be potentially very different. The UK also has a concept that is a little bit different, which is diminished capacity as a result of a mental issue. And that could be used to lessen the charge, but not have the defendant be found guilty by reason of insanity.
We'll get into more aspects of this case. Do you think it applies here from what you've seen?
Well, apparently he does have a history of depression. He was on medication for his depression, and he went off that medication about 6 months before the alleged crimes. So those would be facts that he would likely use. It's going to depend on what the experts say. I think he has to have two, psychological or psychiatrists to act as experts to give their opinion on whether he was insane at the time that the crimes happened. And that will be an important part of it. there's obviously here in the US and in the UK, there's a lot of controversy around defenses like this. And so the court has to be aware of that, especially because this has gotten so much media attention.
Let me tell you what I think might complicate it. I mentioned before, I'll talk about it now. So sometime after dropping the children off at Elaine's, Martin is believed to have sent this message to her, according to the BBC. Quote, "Elaine, I'm so sorry. I can't believe what I've done. I know everyone hates me anyway, especially the boys. I hate myself anyway, and please, please look after the children really well." He then reportedly unlocked Chloe's phone, read messages from her daughter, and then replied to this girl using his own phone saying, "Mom said not today." David, what do you take away from that? How does that, after everything we just talked about, mental health, a possible mental health defense, I think that could be problematic.
I absolutely agree with you. I read that message that he sent to his ex-wife a number of times. It's a bit awkward and a bit odd, but it doesn't show someone who seems to be insane. It doesn't show someone who doesn't understand what they did and doesn't understand that it was wrong. In fact, he's saying sorry. So he's apologizing for it on the same day that it happened. So that's going to be potentially devastating evidence for his claim that he was insane on that day.
And this would be admissible as far as you know?
I think so. I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be. She's going to be able to testify to it, and it's they have the evidence of it that will be submitted, and then also it's in our system, it's not going to be hearsay. So
let's, for those of you who might say, I don't know, those messages maybe are ambiguous, but say, is it really a confession? Here's the other problem. Not long after allegedly sending those messages, he apparently walks into Brighton police station and confesses, reportedly flat out telling them, "I've murdered 2 people." Now, Martin was arrested at the station without incident, kept under observation overnight. During interviews, according to the Times, he told detectives he had flipped, that he hadn't planned to kill them, but, quote, just lost it. And on June 10th, 2023, Martin was formally charged with 2 counts of murder. Now, David, we know that in cases here in the States, whenever someone is accused of confessing, the first thing that defense attorneys look at is, well, was it coerced? Were they read their rights? What were the circumstances? What was exactly said? Is that the same thing we're talking about in the UK? Or, are we saying right now this looks like pretty straight, flat out confession? It's going to be really tough for the defense.
Those could be issues in the UK, but the facts, even here in the US, would suggest that this wasn't coerced. He voluntarily decided to turn himself in. He told his ex-wife he was going to do so, and he went with a confession to give. He wasn't, it wasn't, an involuntary interrogation that resulted in this confession. So for those reasons, I think it's going to be hard for his defense lawyers to get him out of that or to get it, excluded.
Now, this idea that if he's admitting this, then why don't we take everything that he said? If it wasn't planned, it wasn't necessarily premeditated, right? His mind was maybe centered around money, that he and Chloe had gotten into some kind of argument before he allegedly killed her. From what you know, could that argument be considered provocation? Could that be any way to reduce a murder charge in some way in the UK? Heat of the moment kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that the heat of the moment thing is going to take away the premeditation if the court believes that he, was acting, suddenly and as a result of his temper, heat of the moment. I would say, though, that defense is going to be much harder to make for the second person he killed, because after he killed his stepdaughter, he laid in wait for her husband and he attacked him when he walked in the door. That sounds much more like premeditation, and I'm not sure how he's going to, avoid a finding of premeditation given those facts.
Yeah. And we also know, according to the Times UK, that Martin had lent Chloe around $800. That's in American money, which she had been gradually repaying. The BBC reported that Martin himself was facing nearly $11,000 in debt, largely stemming from gambling. And at the time of Chloe's death, she had reportedly reduced her debt to about $200. But according to the Daily Mail, Martin had lent Chloe and Josh various amounts of money over the years, £1,000 for a car, £600 for bills, £1,500 for family expenses. And you wonder, how that might factor into the case. Could it factor into the case? Could a defense lawyer, David, argue that this financial dispute played a role in some way? I mean, we kind of talked about it, but when I read out those numbers, it could be part of the larger story.
I think it's certainly part of the motive that the prosecution will try to establish. And it certainly doesn't make him look good. Obviously, you can't resort to violence to collect any debt, but this is a very small debt, the type of, loaning of money that happens among family members that's quite expected in our society. And so for him to be enraged by the fact that she owed him a pretty small amount of money, $200, and for that to be an excuse or a basis for him to attack and kill her, that's pretty outrageous.
And I mentioned earlier that Martin had reportedly stopped taking antidepressants months before the tragedy. ITV reports that in multiple interviews with psychiatrists, Martin was believed to have suffered from a depressive disorder, although the outlets reports that their opinions vary on whether it was truly severe enough to constitute excusing him from culpability. And David, I think you mentioned this before, this is going to come down to, what do you think, a battle of the experts?
I think so. It'll be a battle of the experts. And if he has really good experts who have a lot of experience in diagnosing people with serious, mental impairment, and they're, able to establish that based on their discussions with him and based on his medical record, then that could give him a stronger basis to make that insanity defense.
So Martin is currently on trial in Brighton. The proceedings started on October 6th. It was not an easy road getting there, by the way. Martin actually first appeared in court in August of 2023, according to the BBC, where despite having reportedly confessed to the killings, Martin instead chose to plead not guilty to murder, but guilty to manslaughter. So the court remanded him into custody ahead of a trial. It was initially scheduled for November of 2023. Since then, the trial has been postponed 5 times. Ministry of Justice figures reviewed by the BBC reveal that there are currently 75,000 Crown Court cases waiting to be heard. The backlog has grown so severe that some new cases, they're not expected to be scheduled until 2029. David, how common is that in the UK?
I'm not sure. It actually sounds a bit like our system, where we have an enormous backlog. We don't have enough judges. We don't have enough prosecutors. I don't know if this is new in the UK system, and if it's the result of decreases in budget for their justice system or not. But I will say that the family members have complained about this, that it has caused a lot of distress for them to keep having it postponed in this way. And so you would hope it will have a quick resolution now, and there will be no further delays.
And the idea that you had a defendant here who apparently pled not guilty to murder, guilty to manslaughter, even after confessing, was that strange to you?
No, I think that has to do with this, defense that they have in the UK of diminished mental capacity, and that's what he's basically going for. I think he realizes he's not going to get full, he's not going to be successful in a full defense of, guilty by reason of insanity. But I think he's trying to get that diminished capacity, which lowers the charge.
Well, his trial is expected to last 3 weeks. Anything you're going to be on the lookout for?
Just what happens with these experts that are likely to testify about his mental condition, and then also how the cases, it will proceed with respect to premeditation, and the difference between the first alleged murder, and the second alleged murder. And with the second one being more interesting on the premeditation side because he was laying in wait for him.
David Tafuri, thanks so much for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
That is all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow me on X or Instagram. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll see you next time.